The Seeking Eye Life Exploration podcast is and will always be free to access. But if you would like to support my work, please consider joining my Patreon or signing up on YouTube as a channel member. By doing so, you will receive exclusive benefits, including early access to future podcast episodes, access to hosted discussion groups, and access to non-podcast supplementary videos. So click the join button underneath this video to join as a YouTube channel member, or find the link to my Patreon page in the description. Thank you.
I'm Jeff Hall, and the people on the internet who will know me through Project Consciousness on Facebook. I'm one of the admins on there. But my background is I was an operational research scientist, got a master's degree in operational research, which is mathematical modelling of real world systems. So my brain is sort of tuned into creating models of things and for explanatory value. But I also had an open heart operation in December 2016. And during that open heart operation, I had a near-death experience. And as a result of that near-death experience, on January 2017, I took up a training in an open circle, which is a mediumship development circle in Windsor Spiritualist Church, which is just a few miles away from where I live. And I stayed there for 2.5 years, during which time I developed the process of being a medium. I can talk to you about that if you like, if you're interested. But people in the group said that they thought I was very good at it. And I actually shocked myself at times by giving people messages from my subconscious that were completely accurate. And I came to the conclusion, well, this mediumship stuff is real. And I think I already knew that because I had an experience after my father died. He spoke to me for 3 weeks after he died. And some of the things he said to me came true. So, you know, I was already well down that path.
So there was precognition aspects to it as well.
Who knows? I mean, strangely, although when I put messages into the Facebook group, I tend to be a little bit sort of prescriptive about what I'm saying, whereas really I'm actually very open-minded as to what the explanations of everything are. But regarding near-death experiences, I've got a strong view that a near-death experience is a real experience. It's a spiritual, certainly extra normal, outside normality experience. They do happen, but they're not experiences of what death is like. What they are is experiences of what the process of dying is, what happens to you as you die. My definition of death, as a result of being a spiritual medium, I should say, I don't act as a spiritual medium now. Once I'd spent 2.5 years studying it, I was satisfied that I'd done enough, and I moved on to transcendental meditation. But yes, as far as near-death experiences are concerned, I fall in favour of the dimethyltryptamine explanation. You know, the N,N-dimethyltryptamine, otherwise known as DMT, and people who are into recreational drugs will know it as ayahuasca, which is a psychedelic. And the research I did showed that DMT is actually produced in the body, not just by the pituitary gland. I've got a few notes here.
But is it pituitary or pineal gland is the general idea?
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Pineal gland. It's I've got so many notes here on it that I probably lost what it was. I'll come to it in a minute. But basically, the body produces, at least 3 parts of your body of your brain produce DMT. And the reason we don't walk around in a psychedelic haze all the time is because there are DMT antagonists that your body produces that basically cancel it out. And those antagonists are 5-HT2A receptor inverse agonists. and the two that I've found were MDL 100-907 and catanserin, which suppress endogenous your own DMT.
And are they neurotransmitters or hormones of some sort? I don't know.
They are enzymes, I believe.
Ah,
I'm
right.
not a biologist or a chemist, but
Neither am
I
I.
believe they're enzymes. Yes.
Sure.
And so the question springs to mind: why would we need a system in our bodies that generates DMT? And there was research done in the 1990s. I've got a list here, and it's you'll probably know some of these names. I don't know if you've ever come across Rick Strassman, Dr. Rick Strassman. He was, I think, the first person to do some studies on endogenous DMT, and he proposed that it produces DMT. Your body produces DMT in response to extreme stresses. Penny Sartori, I think she was Dr. Penny Sartori. She's a nurse doctor, and she worked in intensive care, and I believe she was a theatre nurse as well, and she obviously witnessed people dying, and she did a PhD in near death experiences, and I was lucky enough to go on a conference run by the Neuro Linguistic Programming people, where she spoke, and we had a bit of lunch together, and I spoke to her, and she, from her work, she found that 18% of people who'd had cardiac arrests also had some form of experience, which you might call psychedelic or
Or transcendental,
certainly
something like that.
intense. Yeah, that's it. That's a good word. Yeah, and but she didn't subscribe to the idea that it was an experience of death. She just said it was definitely an experience that 18% of these people were having, and uh, who was next?
It's
I
interesting
think
with Penny because I had a chat with her for the podcast way back
nice
when.
woman, isn't she? Yes.
She's a very nice woman. I tried to reach out to her to get her back on to kind of as an update, but I haven't been able to find an email address for her. But it's funny because I kind of came down on the impression that she was very much of the view that these are real experiences of death. Maybe I misinterpreted what she said, but there's certainly the experiments that she ran, kind of determining the differences between memories of those who had near-death experiences and those that didn't. Came down on the side that those who had the alleged near-death experience was much more accurate in their perceptions of what took place than those that kind of just guessed what would happen and didn't have an experience.
And I think possibly you didn't quite pick up the nuance of it. It's an experience of dying, not an experience of death. Now, from my spiritually side, I would say the experience of death happens when your, let's call it the soul or the spirit, leaves the body for the last time, never to return. One thing that does happen with near death experiences, and you see a lot of this, is out of body experiences. And these are the ones that are responsible for what we call the veridical NDEs, where people leave the body, they go up into the ceiling of the theatre or down the corridor. In one case, I think there was a case where a woman went down the corridor, spotted somebody's trainer sitting on the window ledge outside the window,
Yeah,
came
Kimberly
back, and it
Clark
turned
Sharp.
out it exactly was that. Well, out of body experiences, yes, I totally subscribe to the possibility that out of body experiences exist. In fact, at that conference that I went to, that Penny was at, there was a guy whose name I can't remember, who actually could induce an out of body experience from his own resources without putting himself through too much stress or taking drugs, and he could go to places and report what was happening. You may have witnessed him.
Likely. A friend of mine and me, we're currently undergoing a program for the Monroe Institute. We both
Oh
bought
yes,
we both bought the Gateway Experience CD set, and I'm actively working now to try and induce such an experience, just because
yes.
I am one of those that need to experience it for myself to believe. But we also spoke
Right.
recently with a guy who you described. It could be the same guy, Graham Nichols.
That sounds familiar. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a willfully inducible out of body experience guy, if that makes sense. And we spoke with him recently, and it's certainly very interesting the veridical aspects, because I'm always of the opinion that the veridical aspects are the most important ones because they ground things in reality. But I think what would
Yes.
be interesting is if I give you kind of my overview of what I think about near-death experiences, and you let me know
Yeah.
if it sounds, because I think we have a very similar view, believe it or not. So I think the conclusions we can draw from near-death experiences are that consciousness seems to be able to exist at a point where everything we understand from neuroscience suggests that that shouldn't be possible. And from there, we can infer that as a result, it's plausible to assume that life continues or that consciousness continues after physical death. Although the nature of what it would be, of course, long term after we're no longer revivable, is impossible to know. But we can simply infer from what we hear from other phenomenology, like evidential mediumship, like channeling, like out of body experience, etc. We can infer what would come. But I agree that I don't think near death experiences in and of themselves can evidence what permanent death would be.
Yes. Let's be fair about it. If you can come back and report what experience you had, then by definition you didn't die. You did not die, because when you die, your spirit leaves your body for the last time and doesn't return. But you were in some sort of state, and I'm saying that I believe that was a dimethyltryptamine induced state of consciousness. And what it did, what it does is it opens you to an aspect of reality which is normally filtered out by us. In fact, I think it was it Sampania who came up with
Yeah, the braking mechanisms.
yeah, braking mechanisms, and also even you spoke to Eben recently, didn't you? And he, I think he takes more or less the same view. And I don't know why people get so upset about the idea that it may not actually be an experience of death itself, because in and of itself, it's a very important and obviously not explainable by the natural science that we currently sort of promote in schools. But it's definitely an experience. There's no doubt about it.
No, and I think a lot of people get defensive when we talk about DMT as well, because that carries the assumption that it's all hallucinatory and that there's no kind of base reality to it, that we're basically saying it's all made up. Whereas I don't know about DMT because from what I've read, and I haven't gone deep into it, but it's contested as to whether the endogenous DMT that the brain produces is of a high enough concentration to facilitate trips, whatever that means. But the question is, we still don't know, as you say, whether DMT is just kind of a key that unlocks your brain to experience reality more as it is, as opposed to the generally perceived idea of hallucinogenics, that they are simply that, creating just a erratic brain state that makes us see things that are unreal. We're assuming that.
Well, one of the questions you need to ask when you come up with an idea to explain DMTs is what would be the evolutionary advantage of having a mechanism in your body that was capable of causing you, and we'll talk about hallucinations in a second, causing you to hallucinate or whatever it might be, experience a different realm. And I think the answer is pretty obvious. A good proportion, I don't know what, I've tried to research this, and it could be anything, depending on the species, it could be 10 to 90% of species die in the mouths of predators. That's not a very pleasant experience, I bet. Now, wouldn't it be unusual if evolution hadn't in some way developed a mechanism to insulate the consciousness or the awareness of the creature? I'm talking about creatures in the wild now, from that experience. And we do hear about people. In fact, I only saw this was actually on a Radio 4 program within the last couple of weeks, and it was somebody that had been tortured over in the Gaza Strip. And he said he reached a point where he was in so much pain and agony that he left his body. He stepped outside his body.
I've
I mean,
heard reports like that.
yeah. So this is a phenomenon that we all know happens, and wouldn't it be obvious? I mean, if you want a parsimonious explanation of it,
Yeah.
then nature by its very mechanisms would be odd if it didn't provide some sort of means by which the predated, the person who has been, the animal that's been eaten alive or ripped apart didn't have some sort of mechanism to not have to suffer
Indeed.
the experience.
And then the question arises from that: does that suggest any kind of ontological reality of actually kind of leaving our bodies, or is it just a flood of chemicals that's designed to make dying feel nicer, although it's not a real
Well, I'm
ontological
glad you
thing?
brought up the subject of the ontology of consciousness, because most of the time we find this in Project Consciousness. People start talking about consciousness as though, at its worst extreme, they believe that human awareness is the only consciousness that's possible. I mean, we've reached the point now, and I'm sorry for any vegans who hear me say this, where we've now demonstrated that plants have got primitive consciousness, that they can actually detect the plants, if you like, crying. That's not the right word, obviously. It's a bit emotive when they get cut.
But essentially,
And,
yeah.
I mean, it leaves the vegans in a place where they'll be eating sand and water in the future because there won't be anything that they can ethically eat. But yeah, consciousness is all there is. In fact, I've got a book here. This is there you go.
Consciousness is all there is. Who's
Consciousness is
that at
all
the
there is.
top? Doctor.
That's Tony Nader. He's a MD and a PhD, and he's a neurologist and a neuroscientist. And he's also now the head of the Transcendental Meditation movement. He took over after Maharishi Mahesh Yogi died. Not a lot of people know this, but Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was a physicist. Everybody
Interesting.
thinks he was some peasant from out of the mountains, but he was a physicist. So, if you want to be the head of TM, you've got to be a pretty bright guy as well as spiritual. And so, in this book, it's very heavy going. So, if people are not into abstract reasoning, then they might find that heavy going. He talks about the two realms of existence: the unmanifest and the manifest. And in the unmanifest realm, and this is pure abstract, the unmanifest realm is beyond space and beyond time. There's no space and there's no time. Everything that can happen does happen and happens simultaneously. And how does the unmanifest become manifest? And I'm not going to get into this too deeply because this is not what we're here to talk about. It involves a three-part process that requires an observer, an observed, and a process of observing.
It sounds very much like collapse of the wave function in quantum mechanics.
It does, doesn't it? And I think that idea is built into Buddhist philosophy as well. But basically, when you think about dying, um, if you are living under the paradigm that your consciousness is generated by your brain, then you could be well justified in worrying that your awareness, I'm going to call it awareness, is gone forever. Uh, but ontologically speaking, we're all one consciousness because consciousness is all there is. And in fact, this is just your body and my body are part of the same thing that's taken the opportunity to witness the physical realm. That's and when you do transcendental meditation, what you do is you get yourself into a state of awareness without thinking. Now, for someone with a brain like yours and a brain like mine, actually stopping thinking and just being aware, it takes a lot of practice. I've been at it for 2 years now, doing it twice a day, and I would say I probably get into a transcendental state less than 5% of the time. It takes years, really, of practice. But when I am in that transcendental state, I'm aware, I'm not asleep. It's a fourth state of consciousness. I'm aware of noises and things going on, but I don't think about it. I witness it.
And I think when you mention about humans kind of have this human centric idea that we're the only ones who are aware, and I think that is and I spoke about this recently in my episode 100 thing. Is that people confuse consciousness with the content of consciousness, and
The phenomenon of consciousness. Yes.
exactly. So I usually I can't remember where I heard it initially, but it's a good analogy. Is that consciousness is kind of like the sky, which is the blank canvas of just being aware, not being aware of anything, but just awareness itself. And then the content of consciousness, our emotions, our thoughts, our interpretations, our identity, etc., are clouds within the. And even if it's overcast, an overcast day, that sky is still there and formless and pure, but it still needs to be there for the clouds to actually exist within. And that's similar to what our consciousness is, what animals' consciousness is, what plants' consciousness is. It's just a blank slate of experience. And our brains, the development of our evolution of our brains, just determines the scope of which we are able to interpret the senses that we receive.
Well, for the benefit of people who perhaps not familiar with the terminology, consciousness is described in two ways. One is the ontology of consciousness, and that is what consciousness is, and the other is the phenomenology of consciousness, which is what consciousness does. And the way I see it, consciousness is this grand unified field. We spoke about John Hagley the last time we met, didn't we? I can say something about that if you want me to. But the ontology of consciousness is what consciousness is. It's a field, and in grand unified field theory, the ground of all being is a field of something out of which, and a lot of what I'm about to say is being changed even as we speak, because theoretical science is moving on from string theory at the moment. But let's just go with what's already been posited in the past. There's this field, this grand unified field, in simplistic terms, out of which one-dimensional superstrings pop or evolve or whatever they do to come into existence. Obviously, there must be a process of observing going on if Tony Nader's right. And they're one-dimensional superstrings vibrating in a 10-dimensional manifold. In other words, they've got 10 different dimensions to vibrate in. And a dimension is defined as a dimension can only be independent as a dimension if it's orthogonal, or in other words, at right angles to all other dimensions. In simple terms, you can go north-south without moving east-west. You can go east-west without moving north-south. You can go up-down without moving either north-south or east-west. So they're obviously orthogonal dimensions. Then we've got to leave time out of this because time is a complicated one. We're talking like spatial dimensions now. So a fourth dimension of space means that there's a direction we can move in the fourth dimension whilst staying on the spot in 3 dimensions. There's a dimension we can move in the 5th dimension without moving in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th dimension.
So to try and visualize that, so if we think of like a 2-dimensional plane, from the point of view of that 2-dimensional person, someone that's moving upwards would look like they're not moving at all, and that's the same for the 3 and 4 dimension kind of analogy.
The simple analogy that was used when this theory was first posited was, and it was the Reverend somebody or other, I can't remember his name now, and he talked about the Flatlanders. Carl Sagan did a video on this as well. Flatlanders live in a 2-dimensional plane. They've got no concept of up or down. And one day, an apple comes into the sphere of their existence and just passes through their plane. And as it passes through the plane, it starts off as a dot, then it widens until it's the full diameter of the apple, and then it disappears again. And the people in Flatland have no concept of what on earth just happened. They just saw something open up and close, and they have no awareness of the possibility that there was a 3rd dimension. Well, for a 4th dimension, think of the Earth being in 3 dimensions, and a 4-dimensional thing passes through the Earth plane. We might be equally surprised, and it might appear to us as something supernatural, whereas it might actually be real. The physicists are not very good, not very imaginative when it comes to describing what the 10 spatial dimensions are. They insist it's mathematical modelling. Now, I get what they're talking about there. It is mathematical modelling. But, there was a guy called Rob Bryanton, a friend of mine, lives in Canada, who came up with a video series called Imagining the 10th Dimension. And he tried to visualize what each of the 10th dimensions might be. I'm happy, and it's available on YouTube under 10th dim. That's 10th dim is his tag on YouTube. It's interesting. But he's an artist, he's not a scientist. So anyway, starting again with the grand unified field, these superstrings pop out, and they're one-dimensional. We can't get our heads around what one-dimensional means. But they're vibrating in 10 different dimensions. So they're wobbling about like an elastic band in 10 orthogonal directions. And the particular pattern in which they vibrate determines what particle we give it a label as. So, it might be a quark or a meson or
I
something.
see. Well, no, I don't
And
see, but
the
I get the
quarks
concept.
and the quarks and mesons make up protons and neutrons, and then protons, neutrons, and electrons make up atoms, and the atoms make up molecules, and on we go. But at the base, at the ground of all being, as the Buddhists call it, is this grand unified field of what they say is consciousness. What John Hagelin found was that structurally, if you look at the Vedic model of consciousness, which is the Vedic model of consciousness, is derived from meditation and contemplation, and then mutual agreement amongst people as to what consciousness is. The Vedic model of consciousness is structurally identical to the standard model of particle physics. It's got the same number of items at each level. And John Hagelin said this is more than a coincidence. And so he, I think about 1988, he first came out with a lecture on Is Consciousness the Unified Field? That's available on YouTube as well. John Hagelin, Dr. John
I think
Hagelin.
I think I remember watching it after our first chat.
Yeah,
It was way over my head,
it's
but
heavy. It's heavy physics, yes, because he's a physicist. He was the first person to develop a unified field theory that was 10-dimensional, and that was 1985, I believe. And by 1991, there were 5 competing 10-dimensional models, and then the cleverest scientist that currently exists on Earth, Ed Witten, looked at the 5 models and said they're not competing with one another because there's actually an 11th dimension. And he came up with this theory which is branded M theory, but no, he never told anybody what M stood for. And by adding one more dimension, you can see the other 5 models as, if you like, as being 10-dimensional shadows of a higher dimensional model. That probably means nothing to people who are not mathematicians, but this is the way topology, as they call it, works. It's very complex. Anyway, let's go back to near-death experiences. What's begun to happen in Project Consciousness on Facebook is people are posting videos which I believe are fake. And they'll have typical.
Fake as in
They've
hoax or
made
AI,
they
because now
no
AI is everywhere.
hoax, not AI.
Hoax.
This is people who say, and typically they'll have a headline of I died for 20 minutes and I went into the future and I've got this important message for mankind which you should all read. And the message is that if there was a single future, obviously they all come back with the same message, wouldn't they? But they haven't. So they all come back with what they've dreamed up, which is evidence that if they did have a near-death experience, which I doubt, but if they did, it just suggests to me that a near-death experience is heavily influenced by your own preconceived ideas.
And we know that to be true even experientially, because Christians will see Jesus, Hindus will
Exactly.
see Krishna. As I mentioned, people from Japan won't go down a tunnel; they'll cross a river, which is part of their
Yes.
cultural. So do you think? Because my view or my take on that is that although the experience of it and the interpretation of it is different across cultures and across religions, etc., the fundamental experiences of leaving the body, traveling, meeting something, someone, whatever, and having a life review and returning are all there, regardless. It's just the
Yeah, they
interpretation of them
happen.
is different.
They happen. Yes, and I think Sampania talks about different planes of existence or different dimensions of existence, and that might actually be what people witness. Uh, when people take DMT in the form of ayahuasca, reports come back that you'll have 20 people who will all experience the same hallucination. That needs some explaining if that's true. But the body's got a DMT system in. We know that. We know that there are 3 ways in which I still haven't found my note about on this. There's 3 3 different ways in which DMT can be produced by the body, and the pineal gland is just one of them. And we do know that that the antagonists of it are also there. So supposing we take the common sense view of what a near-death experience is, your body is about to die, and it's a traumatic experience because not everybody has this experience when they die. I mean, I think Sampania said it was 20%. Penny Sartori said it was 18%. So it's about a fifth of people who are in an end of life situation, which triggers, maybe wrongly triggers, a near-death experience by possibly simultaneously boosting the DMT output of the pineal and other glands, whilst suppressing the antagonists. So you get a natural endogenous DMT rush, which then opens up worlds that which are there and they're real and they're probably higher dimensional, but they're normally closed off to our um, normal perception by this filtering process. We couldn't exist if we were aware of the higher dimensions all the time.
Which is what Dr. Donald Hoffman says. That our brain has evolved to allow us to survive, not to see reality as it actually is.
And he's absolutely right. And now that I've got into the transcendental meditation philosophy, I realise that the Vedantas from the ancient, most of them were written in Sanskrit like 3,000 years ago or whatever. They are genuinely real things. They talk about consciousness being the ground of all being and different states of consciousness. And materialist science, I mean, I'm a scientist myself, and so obviously I understand the scientific method, and the scientific method is absolutely brilliant. And believe it or not, quantum mechanics is the most verified scientific theory in existence. So within the bounds of what we're allowed to, our physical minds enable us to experience, materialist science fits the bill. Thank you very much. Tick. Goodbye. But there is something beyond it, and I think in the 37 years that I've been studying consciousness, I've noticed a gradual increase in the minority of scientists who are now willing to entertain the idea that psi phenomena are real. Obviously, have you interviewed Radin yet?
He did express interest in coming on. I got back to him and said, "Are you still interested?" I didn't hear back from him.
He's a busy man. Yeah,
I'm
very
sure
busy.
he is.
He's the chief scientist in the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS, and anybody can join Institute of Noetic Sciences and give them $50 a year or something, and you get access to everything that goes on. And but yes, he does actually properly statistically controlled trials of psi phenomenon. In fact, I think his claim to fame is that he's discovered presentiment or presentiment. It's spelt the same way, but it's pronounced differently, where they've shown that people can pick up messages from the future by up to several seconds ahead. And the key experiment in this was he put subjects in front of a screen and showed them pictures, and the pictures were of all sorts: beautiful landscapes, babies, brutal deaths, sexual scenes,
That's
you
right.
name it. And he was monitoring their emotional reactions to it, and he was discovering that they were reacting to the pictures anything up to a few seconds before the pictures actually appeared.
Especially if they were of the emotionally triggering ones, if I
Mm.
remember rightly.
I don't know actually. I didn't look at the analysis of it, but that's probably true.
Yeah, if I
Uh,
remember, it was especially non-interesting, as you know, being a bloke like me. The sexually active kind of images were very prominent in that
yes,
effect, I think. But as
yes.
was the gore and the violence. But I think that the neutral kind of ones weren't as strong an effect, if I remember rightly.
To be fair about it, would you expect them to be? If
No,
they were neutral and
exactly.
calm, you wouldn't expect it. And here again, speaking as a scientist, the scientific method is to design an experiment in a way where you can rule out, to the best of your ability, random events, and you can rule out extraneous events, so that you focus on what it is that you're trying to measure and not allow external events to influence them. So you design your experiment, you then perform your experiment, and you take your measurements, and that brings in the issue of how accurate are your measurements. What are the error bands either side, the type ones and type twos, which is false positive, false negative. And then at the end of it, when you've got your data, how are you going to analyze it? And once you have analyzed it, what inference, and this is the key point, what inference are you going to draw from the data? And the classic one this is a joke, but the classic way of exemplifying this is, did you know that 10% of fatal road accidents are caused by drunk drivers? Which means that the inference from that is 90% are caused by sober drivers. So for God's sake, get drunk and you'll be safer.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, it's the wrong inference. Do you see what I'm saying?
yeah, yeah. It all
Well,
comes
this
down to
happens.
interpretation.
It does. In that no matter how carefully you conduct your experiments, at the end of the day, it comes down to what your inference is. And it comes also down to what your confidence intervals are. What basically that means is at what level, when you form a hypothesis and you do your trial, you um, if the phenomenon that you're trying to measure happens, you have to make a judgment about what's the chance that this could have happened randomly. And if there's a 95% chance against it being a random thing, so a 95% chance that this is real, that's three standard deviations. I think it's 99% is four. I might have got that wrong. It's a long time ago. But some of the experiments that are now being done in Psi are at what they call 7 sigma. A sigma is a standard deviation. If you were 7 sigma away, then that means there's something like 1 in 10 billion chance that what you've just measured was random. And yet science, it's never good enough for some scientists to go, well, it still could be wrong, couldn't it?
Well, that
And
they
and
then they
yet
start looking at the it must have been poor statistics or a poor way of
poor
interpreting
poor
the
poor methods,
statistics.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's very easy to be critical like that, and in some cases, it's right to be critical. I mean, there is unconscious bias in virtually everything that science does. But the idea that science is some hard and fact, we've measured it, this is it. No, that's not the way it works.
No,
We
it,
measure
it's
things.
it's conflating science with the philosophy of
Yeah.
materialism. Whereas science is a method that is supposed to change and develop with new experiences and new evidence.
And the other thing about if you're a scientist as well, what you should do is you should listen to the um, data. And if the data changes, then your views are they've got to adapt. I mean, uh, the theory that all crows are black, it breaks down when you find your first white crow, doesn't it? So you then have to change the theory. And there's, I don't know if you've, this is slightly going off topic, but have you seen any of the mRNA vaccine post-vaccine studies that are coming online now?
Although I was always reserved of taking the mRNA. I took the for the first two. I took the viral vector. What
Yes,
was it? AstraZeneca ones because that was standard technology and I was happy with
yes,
that. But I was always nervous about the mRNA. It was just too new for me,
yeah. Well,
so I stayed away.
John Campbell is famous on YouTube for being a big promoter.
That's
He's a
right.
doctor nurse, and he's gone completely against it now because what they've discovered initially on Italian data was that a higher proportion of people who'd had the mRNA vaccine were developing things called turbo cancers. Um, and turbo cancers are cancers which uh, seem to metastasize very quickly. They diagnose you with cancer, and 3 months later you're dead. And they'll find sometimes several different types of cancer in your body that have all sprung up simultaneously. So it's obviously not metastases. It's new incidences, and it's because of these spike proteins that are floating around in your body that your body has now been conned into producing because it's an mRNA, and it's the spike proteins themselves that are creating problems in people's bodies. And they found it with cancer, and they've also found it with the inflammation of the heart. Well,
Yeah, myocarditis. I know that that's been very heavily in the news
yes,
recently.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm using that not because I want to get into that discussion, but because John Campbell's he's a scientist. He taught at university epidemiology and vaccination and chemotherapy and stuff like that. Um, and now that the data's come in that shows that mRNA is not safe, he's completely switched his tack, and that's what a scientist should do. Never,
Follow the
never get
evidence.
yeah. Follow the science is the expression that everybody laughs about, but it's true. And with regard to NDEs, I wish people wouldn't insist that I died because they'll say, "Well, I know I was dead because there was no detectable heartbeat and there was no detectable brain waves." Well, yes, that might well be true. But is that because they just couldn't be detected? Was the science wrong? Do we really understand death on a scientific level? When your body's actually physically not functioning again, could it be that the internal functions of your consciousness, of your awareness, could they be still active? And there is some evidence that people are active for potentially up to an hour after they die. Their brains are capable of perceiving. And going back to what we were saying earlier about ontological and phenomenological consciousness, we need different words. Phenomenological consciousness is awareness. It's what your mind does with the input that it gets, and the brain does have a function. It's not just a transceiver. Your brain manages your body. It manages the physical functions in your body, and at the same time, it manages your thought processes and your feelings and all that sort of thing. But the thought
The way
processes are
I've heard it described that makes sense to me is it's kind of like a prism which receives pure white light and is able to diffuse, I don't know, into various different experiences, different
yes,
wavelengths of color. So you receive pure consciousness, and your brain as a prism translates that into all these different phenomenological experiences.
yeah. Well, what I'm leading up to now is this thing that people object to when one says this what this experience you had during your NDE was an hallucination, and they get really uptight about the idea that they might have been having a hallucination rather than experiencing something real. But if you think about it, our existence that we perceive is an hallucination. And I use a little analogy of this. Imagine that you're a disconnected brain in a vastness of nothing, and you've got no input from sensory organs. And somebody then connects a pair of ears to you, and those ears pick up vibration. So what they're actually doing is so that's all that's coming in, the vibration, and your brain has to make something of what that vibration means. And then a pair of eyes gets attached. A physical body gets attached with senses like sensing heat and touch. Um, and what does the brain do with all this information that's coming in, which essentially is just physical phenomena stimulating nerves, leading to electrical or neurochemical inputs into your brain? Your brain then converts that into a reality, a place, a thing, a thought. It's that is a it's a homemade delusion of what the true reality might be. Your brain is only capable of creating a reality out of those bits that it can perceive. And it may be, and I think it is, the case that DMT releases sensory awareness to allow you to experience the true nature of reality, the bit that's hidden from us. And that might be higher dimensional. It might actually be within our dimension. I don't know. It might be within space time, but just out of phase. Who knows? Nobody
So
knows, to be honest.
that then kind of adds on to the question of, as a medium yourself who's had contact from your father and has had experience with channeling, clearly it seems that despite us obviously losing our brains at death, there seems to be some sense of individuality that remains, and memories and senses, etc., after our death, despite not having these sense organs. So,
Mm.
what do you think that means about individuality?
That's a tricky one because I think, according to the Buddhist and the TM philosophy, there's one consciousness. So therefore, we're just instances of a single consciousness. So when our physical body dies, our awareness and our consciousness just merges back into the whole. So how can you have any individuality? Um, I had a book a while ago, I've lent it to somebody, called The Human Akash. And it's all about, you've heard of the Akashic Record. Yeah, the Akashic Record, so-called Book of Life. And in this book, they're positing the idea that there are six dimensions, and that we're six-dimensional beings, and that we're aware of our four-dimensional existence in space-time, but we're not aware of the higher dimensions. But all the time, everything that we experience in life is stored. It's experienced and witnessed by our higher dimensional selves, our real minds, our minds that are capable of doing more than what they seem to be doing in the earth plane. And then when we die, the only bit of us that dies is the four-dimensional part of us. And the bridge between this life and the next life, I'm talking about reincarnation now, the bridge between this life and next life is actually the bit that goes through the Akashic record on the higher levels. Now, whether you believe that or not, it's up to you. It's an interesting hypothesis. It's an interesting idea. I don't know whether it's testable. I suspect not. But I did look as part of my research into consciousness. I looked at reincarnation through the eyes of Tibetan Buddhism, and they built a whole society based on the concept of reincarnation. You probably know that the Dalai Lama is, I think, the 15th reincarnation of himself.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And apparently, you need to lead a life of deep contemplation and meditation in order to be able to maintain the whole of you. This is answering your question. The whole of you to be reincarnated again as the whole of you takes a lifetime of deep meditation. Whereas I suspect most of us get sort of dispersed and come back in parts, one bit here, one bit there. And frankly, I don't, since I've done transcendental meditation, I don't actually fear the idea of a so-called oblivion, because one of the things Tony Nader talks about in his book is the sense of nothingness. Nothing, the concept of nothing, it sounds like, well, there's nothing to say about nothing. It's got no beginning, it's got no end, it's got no boundaries, it's got nothing going on. Yet it is a state of existence, a state of nothingness. And it's not to be feared, because out of nothing comes something by the process of the unmanifest becoming manifest. So who knows whether we'll remember any part of our former life. Have you ever done past life regression yourself?
No, I haven't. Not up till now, anyway.
Yeah, well, it's a potential source of self-delusion, I've got to say. But I've done hypnotic regression, past life regression, and I've also used a thing called the Christos technique. The Christos technique is a visualization method, and I'll tell you how it works. With the Christos technique, you lie in a comfortable position and meditate, and then you imagine yourself gradually expanding outside of your body, first 2 inches at a time, then 4 inches, then 6 inches, and eventually you leave your body and you go up, and you visualize yourself going up into the clouds, and then you turn around and you come down feet first, and when you land on the ground, you're in a former life, and you describe what that former life is. And as I say, it's easy to be self-delusional about this, and I don't blame anybody for saying that's a load of bunkum. But it's interesting what the results come back, and what tends to come back with me is there's always a spiritual dimension to who I am. And in one case, all I witnessed of my former life was I was a monk in a medieval monastery, and I witnessed myself at my own funeral, and I'd fallen down an open stairwell drunk. I mean, you're not. I didn't come back as Elvis Presley. I can tell you that much.
No, or Cleopatra, which is another
Exactly.
common one. Mm.
Yes. And I once came back as a Spanish peasant farming boy living in Andalusia, and living in a farmhouse where because we were in the middle of the mountains, that there was a windmill on the top of the house which provided us with electricity. And I was worried about the olive harvest, that there wouldn't be too many stalks in it because it makes the olive oil bitter. I knew
Right.
nothing about olive oil, but it turns out that's true. When
Interesting.
you're harvesting olives, you don't want oil, you don't want stalks and leaves in it.
That's
You know.
interesting.
Yeah.
So, how would you have come by that information if you didn't know it beforehand?
Well,
Yeah.
the one that was the most interesting, and unfortunately, I threw away the diary. I made a diary entry of it. Uh, I had a hypnotic regression, and I came back as a Buddhist monk living with a Native American tribe in North Dakota, and I came up with the name. And the internet was fairly primitive at the time. This was sort of around 1990 something, 1998 or something. And I went on to, I think it was called CompuServe or something in those days.
Oh
And
yeah, I
and I
know.
searched for this name, and what do you know? It came up, and he was a Buddhist monk living in North Dakota in the
Interesting.
1800s. I mean, tell me where that came from.
So there's something going on, definitely.
Yeah, and I mean, I went into I if the truth be known, I was actually thrown out of the Windsor spiritual circle when they discovered that I was only there to study it rather than to become a medium. But they kept saying, "Oh, you ought to go on the platform," and I kept saying, "No, it's not what I want to do." Because all I was there for is to find out, like you said, I want to witness it for myself. And let me tell you, I said earlier I might talk about the process of what mediumship training is all about, and it's not Gypsy Rose Lee. How many rings have they got on the finger? It's not. It's not. It's not researching their family history in advance. It's nothing to do with that. What it is, it's years, and it took me 2.5 years to actually get to a point where I was producing anything proper of learning to get your what they call ego out of the way and allow your subconscious to channel itself through your body and not somebody else's subconscious, your subconscious. So it's allowing yours because the channel of communication, this is the idea, the channel of communication and mediumship is via your subconscious, not via your conscious. So when you give a message to someone, to a sitter, whatever comes out of your mouth comes out of your mouth, and you're not supposed to edit it or control it or interpret it. You should just say it. You've got to be careful at times because you don't want to say things to people that might be sensitive. But I had a case which was sensitive. I had a sitter, and and her uncle came to me, and he showed me the image of a swastika, and his message was, "I'm sorry that I couldn't be there to look after you." Um, and he showed me the swastika and like a long trench coat, and I didn't know what to do. And I thought, well, I'll do what I was taught to do. I said, he wasn't by any chance. I was telling quite. He wasn't by any chance a Nazi, was he? And she said he was. And he'd said to me that his job wasn't to go out on the front line and kill people. It was more a backroom job. Anyway, and at the end of it, she said to me, he was actually a padre. Now, I didn't even know the Nazis had religion. He was a padre looking after the spiritual well-being of the soldiers, and he died quite young. And this woman was white, and she'd married a black man, and you can imagine that her family were a bit right wing. And so her auntie, that this is the guy's sister, drove her out of the family because she'd married a black man. So she came to
Right.
England.
So they retain kind of that Nazi kind of philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. How could I have possibly known that? I couldn't possibly. I just it came out, and it's happened so many times with me. Just little things, little details here and there. And I saw it happening with other mediums because we used to work together in pairs rather than in public. And I got readings from other mediums that were uncannily accurate. And I know what the process is. I know that they didn't know anything about me, and I had no other choice but to accept that on an anecdotal level, and that's the important word. On an anecdotal level, mediumship seems to be real. And I've seen quite a few reels on Facebook about people examining mediumship and coming up with lots of positive data, all of which is immediately dismissed by the standard materialistic scientist lobby. There you go.
Indeed. And that is obviously a very common rebuttal is anecdote. The plural of anecdote is not data or evidence,
Yeah,
which is all well and good to say until it happens to you, and you're stuck with something that you know you can't explain and can't prove to anyone else, which is also common with the near-death experience because there's now been papers published to determine how best to approach those who had near-death experiences in terms of helping them after they've told you about it because people fear discussing these things because they know what's going to come. Look at Dr. Eben Alexander and the way he was attacked.
yes. We were talking earlier about how we hallucinate our actual lived experience. I believe that the experience you have under DMT is no less real than what we're hallucinating now. It's just a different way of accessing a different aspect of existence. And I think if we could get away from this idea that it's actually an experience of being dead and just treat it for what it actually is, we'd go a lot further with understanding what an ND is. Um, but there are people that I've been abused by online, and I've got to say I sort of laugh at them. I don't take them seriously. But people have been abused by who haven't had near-death experiences themselves, but they set themselves up as pseudo-intellectual experts at it, like because they've read something somewhere or they watched a video on the internet and suddenly they know what's the case. And just try having one, and you'll see. After after I came out of hospital, I actually forgot the details of my near-death experience. And when I spoke to Penny about it, she said they're like dreams. And you wake up in the morning, you remember the dream, and then an hour into your day, you've forgotten what it was all about. And all I know that I met and conversed with my dead relatives. Well, I would do, wouldn't I? Because that's part of my psychological makeup. So therefore, it fitted in with what was already my outlook on life, like it does with everybody. People who meet Jesus and whatnot. But what did happen is every morning I got up and looked out of the bedroom window and I looked at the garden, I looked at the trees, I looked at the hedges, I looked at the birds, and I had the profoundest sense, in a really deeply emotional way, that I was as much part of their world as they were part of my world, and that we were all one system of life. And that's really what made me say, it's about time I actually put my money where my mouth is and go and, instead of just reading about mediumship, go and do it for myself. And likewise, with I've been talking about transcendental meditation and the correlation between the Vedantic model of consciousness and the standard model of particle physics. I thought, well, let's start doing transcendental meditation. Let's find out what there is to find out. And it's a great thing to be involved with. It's actually very good for stress, very good for stress, particularly the anxiety type of stress, if there are any other types of stress. And you do 20 minutes twice a day, and all you're doing is really sitting still. You're given a mantra to repeat. The idea of the mantra is to distract your brain from thinking about things. So you repeat the mantra over and over again, and everybody's mantra is personal to them. And part of the induction process, and there is an induction process which costs money. I think I paid £500 for 3 days worth of induction. But they said, well, you can pay us this much if you earn this much if you earn that much. Or they weren't like, they're not after your money, but obviously they've got to pay the people who are there to teach you. They can't do it for free. And so you learn how to meditate over 3 days, and then you go back to your teacher for tests to make sure you've got it right, and then they just set you adrift in an open boat. You do what you want to do for the rest of your life. And Kaz and I both do meditation twice a day, and I found that for me, it's actually slowed down that motor that whirs inside my head all the time. Is now going at a pace where I can keep up with it, and it's made such a difference to me. Kaz was already so laid back; she was almost horizontal, but she's calmed down as well, and we're both really happy. Uh, and it's like this, it becomes a source of happiness. It's very, very interesting. I definitely recommend anybody that's interested in bettering themselves psychologically and spiritually to take up transcendental meditation. You won't regret it, but it might take a long time before you actually transcend. It's not something you won't do it
It's
on
a
day one.
lifelong thing. Mm.
Yeah, but it's one of those things. If we miss, I missed my morning meditation today because I was very busy this morning, but I've done the evening one, and I missed not having it. I missed that sort of get up, have the shower, have a cup of coffee, uh, biscuit, sit down, meditate for 20 minutes, get up, my day started. I'm full of energy. I'm calm. I'm relaxed. Then after a day's messing about, getting myself in a muddle with my computer or something, then at the end of the day, I sit down, I meditate again, and out it goes. Just get rid of it because and you reach a state, as I said before, where you're witnessing things. So you can still hear things going on, but you don't think about them. And you don't have the process of thinking about things inside your head. What you're doing is you're in a state of awareness without thinking. And it's a very, very nice feeling to be in that state. Very
You're
nice.
clearing the clouds.
Yes, during the first few months, you do tend to go through meditations where you do a lot of thinking. And the idea behind the explanation for that is that as you start to release stresses from your body, they bring with them random thoughts. So stuff that's rubbish that's in your head, as the stress comes out of your body, it'll drag accidentally hook itself onto some stray thought, which will then come into your head, and you just have to let it go and see it for what it is. It's your body releasing stress, and at the end of it, you think, well, I didn't transcend, but and I was thinking all the time, but just think of all those thoughts that have taken away stress with them. It's very good.
And you can, there's a website for that, isn't there, where you can sign up and get the process going?
When you signed up to TM, they give you an app, and I'll pull the app up now. I don't know whether you'll be able to see this. Right. So there's the app. I don't know if you can see that.
Just about,
That's
yeah.
yeah, that's actually a meditation screen where you slide that slider down and it times your meditation and it'll set off a little jingle at the end of your 20 minutes and you do it in stages. But there's also a whole library of videos and talks and stuff like that that you can call on, and that's free to use for the rest of your life. And they keep adding to it, and in it, if you're thinking, oh, I've got nothing to do for the next half an hour, just go and pick up a video off the library and take a look at it. It's great, and the people are very very nice. I've been away on one retreat over in Ipswich at the Peace Palace, and it's all vegan food when you're there, and I'm not a vegan, but I don't mind. It's actually Vedic type food. It's all the stuff that's in there is all part of the spiritual process. But yeah, 3 days of complete and utter brain off, taking it easy amongst a beautiful bunch of beautiful people. Yeah, very nice.
Sounds like something that would benefit me, especially with my anxiety disorder and depression.
It
Problem is,
would.
is my wallet's very empty at the moment, so it wouldn't be
Yes.
feasible yet. But eventually, once my book Russet is published, maybe then I'll have some funds.
So I want to just sort of summarise overall what our conversation about near-death experiences is. The main thing I want to say is that near-death experiences are not an experience of actual death, because if you were actually dead, you would not be able to come back and talk to us about it. So you weren't dead, no matter what science may say they measured or didn't measure, you were not dead. Death is a state of your soul leaving your body for the last time. That's important, never to return. Out of body experiences are real. There are people that can do out of body experience by pure willpower, and they've been proved to be veridical experiences. And veridical NDEs are, I think, are getting confused with OBEs. OBEs and NDEs are two different things. But the experience that is an NDE, I strongly believe it, are initiated by a release of DMT and possibly a restriction in the DMT agonists that are within your body already, and they're triggered by a very close to death traumatic experience, and sometimes they're triggered incorrectly. But I'm definitely not saying that NDEs are not a real experience that needs to be looked at, and people need to believe what people tell them, that they did witness a different reality. But it's a different reality that's there. It's just a different interpretation of reality within the big grand scheme of what reality really is, because our brains filter out most of what's actually there to leave us with a life in the three-dimensional plane, four-dimensional plane that's livable. And if we were capable of being able to see all dimensions at the same time, we probably wouldn't be able to function. So don't anybody that watches this video and wants to slag me off, I'm not dissing near-death experiences, I'm just dissing what the explanation of them is.
And I think it's important to get different points of views out there to prevent, near-death experience science, which is what it is, from becoming some kind of religious following
It
of,
is. It's that already.
unchallengeable presuppositions. Because, as you say, we can deduce or infer what real death would be as a result of the near-death experiences, but we can't say that near-death experiences are exactly what we can expect after death. And although, ontologically these experiences might be real, the interpretation of them of an individual doesn't mean that that interpretation is going to be the same experientially for everybody else. And that it means there is any grounded truth in those things, even though it might be on a personal level.
Well, in my experience, the explanations and descriptions of near-death experience have got more in common with what you read about with DMT experiences than what I've witnessed in spiritualist churches. That you don't get psychedelic landscapes coming forward from a medium. It just doesn't happen. It's a different thing altogether. And so for me, having witnessed being a medium, I know that mediumship is a real thing. There's lots of fakes out there, mind you, who are very good at faking mediumship, but you have to be wary of them. But mediumship's a real thing because there are higher things beyond what we think is real.
So, taking into consideration your near-death experience, your opinion on other near-death experiences, and your experience with mediumship, channeling, and everything else, and plus your research over so many years, what do you think is the experience for us as individuals following death?
Whatever I might say next is just going to be my subjective experience or subjective opinion. I can't speak for anyone else. But I think we will pass into a state of pure awareness, unbounded awareness, which is impossible to actually describe, because we'll be in a realm, our ontological consciousness, our thing that's consciousness, will be in a realm where there's no space and there's no time, where everything happens simultaneously and everything that can happen does happen. We'll be back in the realm of the unmanifest. And it's impossible to even conceptualize what that might be, because the human brain is not capable of being able to visualize or encapsulate the concept of unboundedness. The infinite set. Infinity is something you can't conceive of. No limit. There's no limit either way. So we can only deal with things that have beginnings and ends and boundaries. And we'll be in a state of pure consciousness. And probably we'll be in a state of infinite connectedness to everything. I can't even begin to imagine what that's like. But I don't think we'll regret it. People say, oh, I worry about oblivion. Oblivion is nothingness, but nothingness is a state of calm. Nothingness is a state of neither beginning nor end, neither a thought or a feeling. It's a state of nothingness. It's a state of total stillness. Nothing
Although
to be afraid of.
to imply nothingness, including the absence of consciousness, is that, to me, that seems like a logical contradiction, that is an experience at all, or could ever be an experience.
Yeah, I said it was abstract, and it's not an experience. Tony Nader has got a video out. If I can find it, if it comes up again, because they come up randomly. If it comes up again talking about nothing, I'll send it to you. But it's a sort of it's a philosophical construct rather than something. We're so used to describing things in materialistic terms. How can we describe something that isn't material? It isn't bound by time or space. And if there is one consciousness, then you are. I'm part of you. You're part of me. I'm part of that printer over there. You're part of that door behind you. I mean, it's hard to get your head around the fact that everything in existence is a manifestation of consciousness. At the most fundamental level, an electron, has got, if you like, one bite of consciousness. Consciousness, because if consciousness is the ground of all being, then that means all things, as well as all life, all things somehow participate in the field of consciousness because they derive from the field of consciousness. And the act of observation must be a special aspect of consciousness, which manifests reality from the abstract realm of nothingness. That, I know that doesn't make any sense at all. And if you're looking for somebody who can actually tell you what life's like after death, you probably won't find anybody. But everything that I've witnessed in mediumship from people, because I was actually the webmaster for a Amersham Spiritual Centre for about 10 years, and so I saw a lot of mediums come and go, and the none of the messages that came back ever came back in any form or sense other than love and peace and tranquility. There was no bad things. There was no, and in my experience, there was never any bad things. People say demons exist, but I think demons actually live inside your imagination, and then they become real because you manifest them.
Yeah,
They
indeed.
don't actually exist.
It's interesting because a major part of my depression is, and it's impossible to describe, but it's almost like a sense of homesickness, or like it's real grief, but for something, not for something that you've lost, but for something that you long for.
Is it something worse than imposter syndrome?
I don't know. I've never known
Imposter
much about that.
syndrome is when you're doing a job. Let's say you've been promoted to a level that's beyond your level of competence, even when it isn't. That you get this feeling, I'm an imposter here.
It's kind of like that, but the other way. Like it feels like I'm too restricted to be able to do the things that I feel like I should be able to. I don't know. It's impossible to describe.
Well,
It's a feeling.
now I've got the sense of what you're saying. But there's a fundamental question you need to ask, and that is, who is doing this restricting? Who is imposing these bounds on you? It's you. You're creating your own bounds. You're creating your own rules of existence, and therefore you're telling yourself that you're missing something out. You're missing out on something, or you're not allowed, or shouldn't be here. It's the gremlin inside your head that comes from you. It's not. Otherwise, you've got to believe in evil spirits, and there is no such thing as evil spirits. There's no such thing as the devil. There's no such thing as hell. All there is a state of existence after you died. Even Hitler goes into the same state of existence as the rest of us. So it's a it's easy to say this and extremely difficult to do. But try to get your head round the fact that you are living in your reality, because as we've just been talking about, we create our own reality by a form of a hallucination based on the sensory input that we've got. Our brains construct a world, and the reason why we all think we're living in the same world is because we've all got very similar inputs, and therefore we're bound to have some consensus of opinion about what the real world is. But who's to say that what you see as red isn't what the same I see as blue? We'll never know, will we?
Indeed. No.
We'll never know. And so don't ever tell yourself that you are living your life is subject to someone else's rules. Accept that you are the person that's creating your own life. And therefore, if you've created something bad, it's possibly something inside your head, a bad feeling inside your head that's triggered and exploded almost like an internal hand grenade going off inside your head that's making you think that your life's being controlled from outside, and it isn't. You have got free will. Let's not get started on that because I'll start punching
Yeah,
if people
that's a
start
big thing
telling.
as
If
well.
anyone else ever tells me there's no such thing as free will, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to get my boxing gloves out. You create your own existence and your own reality, and unfortunately that includes the bad times as well. And we've all been through bad times. I mean, you're not the only one. I've had bad times myself. When I was your age, I suffered with lots of anxiety, extremely acid reflux, and constantly feeling wound up and sort of not well, and like as though life's against me sort of thing, And it's just one of those things that in those days I hadn't actually grasped the idea that, well, this is my reality. I'm creating it, so why the hell am I creating a bad reality for myself? Let's start being a bit more positive. And interestingly, your thoughts create your life. That's a Louise Hay comment. Uh, when you're tempted to think bad things, resist it and start thinking good things. And a good way of thinking good things is to say good things to people. I've seen you do this on your videos. You say nice things to people all the time. Why can't you say nice things to yourself? Because you certainly deserve it. I mean, I'm full of admiration for you for what you've achieved with
Bless your
these
heart. I
video
appreciate it.
books, and as evidenced by the sheer strength of characters of the people that you brought on and submitted to being interviewed by you, even Alexander for an obvious one.